A lone man gave shelter to a native girl. The next day, a hidden map was discovered in his cabin. The planet Kepri 9, far from the bustling colonies of the Terran coalition, was a place where silence lived like a steady companion. The wind here never carried news or voices. It only swept across the rocky plains, brushing against jagged cliffs and sand dunes that glimmered faintly under the light of two distant suns. Elias had come here not to escape people, though that was a fortunate consequence, but to study the land in solitude, charting its rivers and rock formations, its storms and shifting shadows, as the old surveyors had done decades ago. His cabin, small and sturdy, sat on the edge of a plateau overlooking the red wastes, a stretch of dunes that seemed endless. Built from reinforced alloys scavenged from ancient Terran surveys, it looked simple from the outside. Inside, it was cluttered with relics of a life he had left behind. Data pads, star maps with corners folded from repeated study, and an assortment of tools that Elias never seemed to use for anything other than careful tinkering. He liked the quiet, the predictable rhythm of his days. Wake with the first sun, check sensors, record observations, repair his equipment, and sleep under the twin moons. The world outside moved fast, but in his cabin, time had a gentleness that nothing else could offer. On this particular evening, the sky was restless. The twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the plateau, and the wind carried the electric scent of an approaching storm. Elias tightened the straps on his cabin door and checked his instruments. Storms on Kepri 9 were not uncommon, but this one carried a warning pulse. The electromagnetic readings on his sensors were spiking. If he didn't secure the cabin and all his external equipment, he could lose weeks of careful data collection in a single night. As he moved around, checking the solar panels and securing his storage units, a faint noise reached him from beyond the perimeter. At first, he ignored it. Wind carries strange sounds here all the time, stones rolling down cliffs, dust shifting across dunes. But then he heard it again, a low, strained cry barely audible over the wind. Elias froze. He was not a man easily startled. He had spent months alone here, sleeping under the stars, listening to the planet's quiet heartbeat. But this sound was different, human. Cautiously, he grabbed his portable lantern and stepped outside. The storm had not yet arrived, but the sky was dark with rolling clouds, and the wind tugged at his jacket with insistent strength. He moved toward the source of the sound, a low area where the sand had gathered into natural ridges. There, half buried beneath the loose sand, was a girl. She was small, her body shivering, her clothes torn, and her hair coated in fine dust. Her eyes opened briefly when he crouched near her, wide and dark, filled with confusion and fear. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now," Elias said, keeping his voice calm. She did not respond, only watched him, her gaze sharp despite her obvious weakness. He could see she was hurt, bruises along her arms, scratches on her legs. Whether from the fall, the wind, or something worse, he did not know. But the storm was coming, and she could not survive it out here. With gentle hands, he lifted her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, but he felt the tension in her muscles, the quiet alertness that spoke of someone who had learned to survive alone. Elias carried her to the cabin, setting her on the small bed in the corner and wrapping a blanket around her. She did not speak, but she did not resist. Elias moved quickly but carefully. He stripped her torn outer layer, cleaning her wounds as best he could with what he had on hand. The medkit was basic, designed for minor injuries, but it would have to do. She flinched at the touch of the antiseptic, but she made no sound. Hours passed. The wind shrieked outside, battering the cabin with sudden gusts that rattled the walls. Elias checked the data pads, adjusting the cabin's sensors to account for the storm, but his attention always returned to the girl. She did not rest easily. Her eyes followed every movement, alert even when he turned his back. He could feel a strange intelligence in her gaze, something beyond her years or appearance. Finally, exhausted, he stepped outside for a moment. Rain had begun to fall in sharp, stinging sheets and lightning fractured the sky. He watched the storm, his thoughts turning over possibilities he could not fully grasp. Who was she? How had she survived the red wastes? The planet was dangerous, and human survivors outside official settlements were rare. He knew bringing her here was risky. Terran law forbade harboring unknown natives, but he could not leave her to die. Returning inside, he found her sitting up, shivering beneath the blanket. For the first time, she spoke a word. It was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried a clear tone of recognition. "Elias," she said. He froze. How could she know his name? He had never seen her before. I'm Elias," he replied cautiously, lowering himself to sit across from her. "Do you know me?" She shook her head, but then pointed to the cabin wall where the panels hid old circuitry from the Terran survey team. Her eyes lingered there, intense, almost pleading. Elias frowned. There was nothing there now, only walls and faded paint. "Don't worry," he said. "You'll be safe tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure everything out." But deep in his chest, a small unease settled. There was something about this girl, something beyond ordinary. As the storm continued, he thought of the old stories of Kepri 9, of strange lights in the dunes, of abandoned colonies, of alien signals misread by human sensors. He had always dismissed them as myths, but now, sitting across from her, he felt a pulse of possibility, that the planet still held secrets humans were never meant to uncover. The girl drifted into an uneasy sleep. Elias watched her for a long time, noting the rise and fall of her chest, the way her hands rested on the blanket. Outside, the storm raged, and the cabin shuddered under the force of the wind. But inside, it was warm, safe, and oddly still. Elias settled into his own bed, but sleep did not come easily. He thought of the storm, of the strange cry that had led him to her, and of the way her eyes had seemed to know more than any child should. He felt, in a way he could not explain, that the night would change everything. And it did. He woke before dawn to a faint hum, a light glowing softly beneath the cabin floorboards. Confused, he approached the source, only to see it. A small section of the wall pulsed with light, projecting an intricate pattern onto the air in front of it. Lines and shapes moved in impossible geometry, forming what appeared to be a map of the stars, but not any stars he had ever charted. The constellations were unfamiliar, their alignments impossible according to Terran records. The girl was already awake, standing silently by the projection. She looked at the map, then at Elias, her expression unreadable. She pointed at the patterns, her finger tracing shapes that seemed to shift under her touch, almost as if the map responded to her presence. Elias took a deep breath. He had spent years exploring and documenting the galaxy, but never had he encountered anything like this. The cabin, the storm, the girl, everything had converged into something he could not ignore, something hidden. As he studied the map, trying to understand its strange logic, the hum grew louder, resonating through the floorboards and into his chest. Elias realized that this was no ordinary projection. The cabin itself, abandoned and forgotten by human hands, was alive with technology that predated him, technology that might have been left behind for someone like him, someone capable of seeing it and choosing how to act. And for the first time in his life, Elias felt that the isolation he had chosen was not a shield from the world, but an invitation. The girl watched silently, and though she said nothing, Elias felt her trust. She had been left alone in the desert, and yet here she was, choosing to stay with him. Somehow she knew that he could understand, that he could protect her, that he could see the map. Elias' mind raced. Who had built this cabin? Why had it hidden this map? And most importantly, what did it mean for the future of Kepri 9 and for humanity? The storm began to subside, leaving the desert quiet and glowing under the twin suns' early light. But Elias did not sleep. He stood before the map, feeling its pulse and weight, knowing that the world he had chosen to live in was no longer just his own. Somewhere beneath the dunes, secrets waited. And tomorrow he would begin to uncover them. The morning sun rose slowly over the red wastes, painting the sand in soft shades of gold and rose. The storm from last night had left the air crisp, the sky clear, and the winds gentle for the first time in days. Elias Vorn stood in his cabin, staring at the map that hovered in front of him. Its soft hum filled the room, vibrating faintly against the walls. He had never seen technology like this. The map was alive. Lines shifted subtly, forming new paths and symbols with each passing moment. Constellations he had studied for years seemed to twist and change, merging into configurations that defied logic. He reached out and the air above the cabin responded, a glowing outline appearing under his fingertips. The map was interactive, and more than that, it seemed to recognize him. The girl remained silent, standing beside the projection. She did not touch it but observed with sharp, intent eyes. Her presence was calm, almost commanding, yet she carried no fear. Elias could feel it. She was waiting for him to understand or perhaps to act. "Where? What is this?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. She finally spoke, her voice soft and melodic. It was broken, not Terran language, but somehow he understood her meaning. She pointed to a cluster of symbols deep within the desert. Then she pointed to herself, then to him, and finally to the map as a whole. Her gestures were clear. "This is connected to you, to me, to everything." Elias frowned. "Connected? How?" She said nothing further but stepped back, letting him study the map. He approached cautiously. A surge of recognition swept over him as he traced the pathways on the projection. They were underground. Not just terrain features, but hidden vaults, tunnels, and structures buried beneath the sand for centuries. "This can't be real," he murmured. He had studied this planet from orbit, from scans, from years of surveys. Nothing in official records showed structures here. The coalition had declared Kepri 9 uninhabited. Any map like this should not exist, but it did, and the girl knew it. Elias paced the cabin. Every line he traced on the projection seemed to awaken something inside the cabin. Lights flickered in panels he had never noticed, compartments opening slightly before snapping shut. It was as if the cabin itself was responding to their attention, alive with a purpose that neither of them fully understood. He paused, staring at the symbols closest to the edge of the plateau. They were different, ancient in appearance, almost alien. Some of the tunnels led to chambers that seemed to contain life support systems, frozen in time. He realized with a mix of awe and fear that someone, or something, had left these underground structures intentionally, hidden from the world. The girl moved closer, pointing to one of the larger chambers. She tapped lightly, then pressed her palm to her chest. Elia's stomach tightened. Whatever was down there, it mattered to her. It mattered deeply. Hours passed. Elias worked with what little tools he had, trying to interface with the projection. He could not yet control it fully, but he could trace routes and understand patterns. Each tunnel, each chamber was a discovery. The technology seemed designed to guide, to reveal secrets only to someone willing to care, to protect. As the day progressed, Elias realized that the structures weren't empty. The chambers were not just storage, they were refuge vaults. Carefully sealed units contained signs of life support, preservation systems, and intricate mechanisms that suggested their occupants had been waiting. But for what? And why? The girl watched him intently, occasionally gesturing toward specific areas. Her expression changed with each location. Some areas she marked with warmth, as if they were safe. Others she marked with fear, hesitation, a warning not to proceed. Elias began to piece together a story he had not expected. Kepri 9 had not been abandoned. It had been intentionally concealed. Somewhere in these vaults, life from long ago had survived, hidden from human colonization. And somehow this girl was a part of that story, or at least connected to it. "Are these people?" he asked finally, breaking the silence. The girl nodded slowly. Then she pointed at him, then at the map. Her meaning was clear: they need you. Elias swallowed. "Why me?" Again she did not answer in words, but he felt the weight of her gaze. It was not fear or demand, it was trust. The kind of trust humans rarely gave, even to each other. He felt an odd sense of responsibility settle over him. He had come to this planet to be alone, but now he understood. He had not been alone for long. The cabin had chosen him. The girl had chosen him. And the hidden structures below the sand had been waiting for someone like him. The day passed slowly. He explored the map, taking notes, tracing lines, trying to predict where the entrances might be. He realized that the vaults were not randomly scattered. They were placed strategically, as if someone had wanted to hide them from satellites, scans, and human eyes. Some vaults were deep beneath mountains. Others were hidden beneath the shifting sands of the desert. Each one was a puzzle, waiting for careful hands to solve it. Night fell again. The twin moons rose over the plateau, casting soft silver light into the cabin. Elias had eaten nothing, drank only a little, and had barely moved from the projection. The girl sat cross-legged on the floor, humming softly in her native language. He had learned to recognize the patterns in her voice, even if he could not understand the words. There was comfort in her tone, a steady rhythm that reminded him of lullabies he had long forgotten. Suddenly the cabin shuddered. The hum of the map grew louder, vibrating through the walls. Elias stepped back, startled. He realized that the map was reacting to something beyond the cabin, something moving, alive, unseen. The girl's eyes widened and she pointed toward the horizon, then back to the map, then at Elias. Panic touched her face for the first time. Elias followed her gaze. At first he saw nothing, just the calm dunes under the moons. But then a shadow shifted at the edge of the plateau, barely visible but unmistakable. Someone, or something, was approaching. Elias grabbed his jacket, preparing to face whatever threat might come, but the girl did not hide. Instead, she stood, placing herself slightly in front of him. Her eyes met his, and in that silent moment, Elias understood. She trusted him to act, but she also knew that he was capable. Minutes passed, tense and quiet. The shadow drew closer, revealing itself as a human figure. Elias' relief was immediate but tempered with caution. In the red wastes, any unexpected visitor could be dangerous. He raised a hand in greeting. "Elias Vorn." The figure's voice was mechanical, clipped, almost official. "This is Terran Survey Command. We've detected anomalies in this sector. Identify yourself and the origin of your activities." Elias froze. He had expected solitude, maybe storms, maybe strange desert wildlife, but he had not expected a coalition patrol. He glanced at the girl. She remained calm, her dark eyes unblinking. Then Elias did something he had never done before. He smiled faintly. "I am Elias Vorn," he said evenly, "and I've been studying this planet alone. As for anomalies, you might say I've found something very old. Something that was hidden for a reason." The patrolman's scanner flickered across the cabin, detecting the hum of the hidden technology, the subtle energy of the map. He raised an eyebrow. "You're aware that anything outside official survey channels is illegal." Elias' hand brushed the projection lightly. The map responded, shimmering like water in sunlight. "I am aware," he said, "but sometimes the truth cannot wait for law or regulation. Sometimes it demands action." The girl stepped closer, placing her small hand on Elias' arm. The patrolman scanned her but did not intervene. There was something about her, something older and wiser than her years, that seemed to command respect. The hum of the map grew louder, almost urgent. Elias understood that the underground structures were more than historical relics. They were living systems, waiting to be activated, waiting for someone who could care enough to awaken them safely. "I suggest you leave," Elias said to the patrolman calmly. "Some things are not meant to be disturbed by force, and this is one of them." The patrolman hesitated. The hum was undeniable. His scanners were picking up levels of energy and technology far beyond anything cataloged in coalition records. After a long moment he nodded, speaking into his communicator. "We will report back. Do not leave this location." Elias watched him leave, relief washing over him. The girl relaxed slightly, her shoulders dropping in the first sign of comfort since he had found her. She looked at him, smiled faintly, and whispered something in her language. Elias did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. "We are ready." Night deepened. The stars above Kepri 9 glimmered in impossible patterns. Elias returned to the map, tracing lines, marking entrances, and predicting hidden chambers. The girl sat quietly, occasionally pointing or humming softly. The hum of the cabin, of the map, of the life waiting below the dunes, filled the room. Elias realized that his solitude was over. The world he had known, the quiet life he had cherished, had ended. In its place was a story far larger, far older, and far more dangerous than he could have imagined. And in the heart of the cabin, in the soft light of the map, Elias understood the truth. Some discoveries do not wait. Some choices must be made immediately. And for the first time he felt not fear but purpose. The desert outside was quiet once more. But below its sands, secrets stirred. And tomorrow, Elias knew, he would begin the journey that could change everything. Elias Vorn woke before dawn, his mind still buzzing with the events of the previous night. The storm had passed, leaving the desert cold and silent. The girl was already awake, sitting near the cabin window, watching the horizon as if she could see through the sands and into the depths of the planet itself. Elias stared at her for a long moment. He still did not know her name, but he felt certain that the name mattered less than the purpose she carried. Breakfast was simple, dried rations and water, but neither of them spoke much. Words felt unnecessary. The map pulsed softly on the cabin wall as if urging them onward. Elias traced the lines again, following the tunnels and vaults beneath the dunes, and for the first time he understood the scale of what they had discovered. The underground network was vast, far larger than he had imagined. These were not mere storage chambers. They were safeguards, carefully hidden to protect something vital, something that had survived generations. The girl finally spoke, her voice low and deliberate. She pointed at the projection, then at Elias, then toward the desert. He understood. She wanted him to follow her to see what lay beneath the surface. Elias nodded. "All right," he said, "show me." They left the cabin just as the twin suns began to rise fully. The sands shimmered in the morning light, stretching endlessly in every direction. Elias carried a pack with basic tools and his data pads, while the girl walked lightly beside him, barefoot despite the harsh terrain. She moved with a grace and confidence that suggested she had spent years navigating this world, knowing its hidden paths and dangers. After hours of walking, guided by the map, they reached a low ridge. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary mound of sand, but the girl stopped, crouched, and tapped lightly on the surface. Elias stepped closer. There was a subtle vibration underfoot, almost imperceptible. Then, with a click and a hiss, a panel slid open, revealing a dark tunnel below. Elias blinked. "You mean this has been here all along?" The girl nodded, stepping aside to let him descend first. He felt a strange mixture of awe and apprehension. The air in the tunnel was cool, slightly damp, carrying the scent of earth and ancient machinery. Lights embedded in the walls flickered on as they moved, illuminating symbols that matched the projection back at the cabin. "This is incredible," Elias whispered. He moved carefully, scanning the walls and ceiling. "Who built this?" The girl looked at him, her eyes wide. She spoke in her language again, pointing to symbols and then to her chest. Elias understood only partially, but he grasped the essence. "This is sacred." They descended deeper into the tunnels. The air grew heavier, and the silence of the desert above was replaced by a low hum of machinery, alive but dormant, waiting. As they walked, Elias noticed small chambers branching off from the main corridor. Some contained supplies, preserved food, water, medical kits, but others held more striking contents, storage pods with faint lights indicating life support. Elias stopped before one of the larger chambers. Through the translucent panels, he could see the faint outlines of people or beings lying in stasis. They were humanoid, but their features were different from any human he had ever studied. Their skin had a subtle iridescence, their forms elegant and tall. He felt a deep unease but also a surge of responsibility. "They're alive," he whispered. The girl nodded solemnly. She gestured at the pods, then at Elias, then at the map projected in the cabin. He realized that these beings had been waiting, preserved for centuries, hidden from humanity's reach. The question came immediately: why? And who had chosen to hide them? They moved through the tunnels, finding more chambers, more pods. Each revealed a similar story: life preserved in careful stasis, maintained by systems far more advanced than anything Elias had ever encountered. It became clear that Kepri 9 had not been abandoned. It had been protected, intentionally hidden from human colonization and surveillance. Elias stopped in a central chamber, where the largest and most complex systems were located. The girl tapped a panel, and the lights flickered to life. Displays appeared, showing energy levels, environmental controls, and a countdown timer that had long since stopped. She gestured at Elias, pointing to the controls and then to herself. He understood. She needed him to help awaken the system safely. Hours passed as Elias studied the mechanisms. His engineering knowledge, combined with careful observation, allowed him to interface with the alien technology. The girl guided him silently, occasionally humming, occasionally pointing to symbols that reacted to his touch. Together they worked as a team, bridging human knowledge and the alien design. At last the systems hummed steadily. Life support stabilized. The pods began to warm and faint movement could be seen within. Elias stepped back, watching in awe as the beings slowly awakened. Their eyes opened, shimmering with awareness, scanning the tunnel and finally focusing on the girl and then Elias. One of them, taller and more luminous than the rest, raised a hand in greeting. Elias' heart pounded. He had never felt so small and yet so important. "They are waiting for us," he whispered. The girl nodded, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She spoke in her language, and though he could not understand, he felt the meaning. "We have begun the awakening." The beings began to move, carefully exiting the pods. Their movements were deliberate, measured, and full of grace. Elias noticed a striking intelligence in their eyes, a depth of experience and knowledge far beyond ordinary humans. The girl stepped forward, speaking softly. The beings responded, not in words but with gestures, a silent communication that seemed effortless. Elias realized that he had stumbled into history. These beings were not simply survivors, they were custodians of a past humanity had forgotten. And somehow, the girl had been the key to their survival, guiding Elias to the very moment when the old and new could meet. As the sun set, painting the tunnels in golden light filtering from above, Elias felt a surge of understanding. The coalition had not missed Kepri 9. They had erased it from history, intentionally burying what they could not control. And now, he and the girl were responsible for bringing it back to life. The girl led him deeper into the central chamber, where the largest control system hummed steadily. Elias could see patterns similar to the map in his cabin, but far more complex. The symbols shifted as he approached, almost acknowledging his presence. He placed a hand on the panel, feeling the warmth, the hum, the undeniable energy of something alive. "This is amazing," he breathed. "I've never seen anything like this." The girl's eyes shone. She spoke a single word in her language, repeating it until he could sense its weight. It meant something like home. Elias understood. These beings had waited for centuries, hidden and forgotten, longing for someone to awaken them. And now, with the map, the cabin, and the girl, the time had come. But as they worked, Elias felt a prickle of unease. The desert above was vast, but it was not empty. Others would notice these anomalies, satellites, patrols, perhaps even those who had buried these secrets in the first place. Every action they took, every pod awakened, was a risk. And yet he could not stop. The beings began to communicate more actively, sharing knowledge in ways Elias could understand. Gestures, symbols, and even a few sounds that were strangely familiar. They spoke of the past, of the reason for the vaults, and of a world that had been hidden to protect life that could not survive in open conflict. Elias listened, learning not just about the beings, but about humanity itself. They spoke of cooperation, of respect for life, of mistakes that had been made when humans sought control over worlds they barely understood. And in their stories, Elias found a reflection of the girl, a bridge between two worlds, human and alien, past and present. By nightfall, the initial awakening was complete. The tunnels hummed with life and energy. The beings moved among the pods, stabilizing what had been preserved. The girl sat beside Elias, exhausted but calm. She placed a hand on his shoulder and smiled faintly. "You've done well," he whispered. She nodded, her dark eyes shining in the low light. He realized something important. This was only the beginning. The underground vaults were just the start of a much larger story, one that could reshape humanity's understanding of Kepri-9, of the galaxy, and of themselves. Elias felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on his shoulders. He had chosen solitude for years, believing that the world could be observed from a distance. But now he knew the truth. Solitude was no longer possible. Action, understanding, and courage were required, and he would not fail. As the twin moons rose over the desert above, Elias looked at the girl and then at the awakened beings. He felt something he had not felt in years: hope. The truth beneath the soil had been revealed. And humanity, or at least what remained of it in those hidden chambers, had a chance to begin again. The desert of Kepri-9 was quiet that morning, but Elias Vorn felt a growing tension beneath the stillness. The tunnels below the plateau hummed with life. The beings they had awakened moved carefully, stabilizing systems, exchanging gestures, and exploring chambers that had remained sealed for centuries. Yet Elias knew the calm was fragile. The coalition had satellites watching this sector. Unexplained energy spikes, human activity, or even the mysterious hum from the cabin could draw attention. Elias stood near the largest control panel in the central chamber, scanning readouts and checking connections. The girl moved beside him, her eyes alert, watching his hands as if reading his thoughts. The awakening of the vaults had been a success, but the map in his cabin had warned him that secrets like these could not remain hidden forever. He turned to the girl. "We need a plan," he said. "If the coalition finds this, they'll try to take control." She nodded. Her small hand rested on the glowing panel. Then she pointed at Elias, then at the tunnels, then toward the surface. He understood. They needed to protect the beings and the vaults first, but she also wanted him to act boldly. Elias tapped his comm pad and began sending encrypted signals. He knew the coalition's networks were monitored, but he improvised a method. A simple broadcast, scattered across civilian channels, revealing parts of the map, enough to make the information public without endangering the vaults immediately. If the coalition tried to erase it, the world would already know. Hours later, the desert above remained empty, but Elias sensed the first stirrings of trouble. Satellites had shifted orbit slightly, likely reacting to the energy fluctuations from the vaults. Somewhere above, the coalition was watching, waiting, and preparing. "We can't hide forever," Elias said to the girl. "They'll come." She did not respond in words. Instead, she led him to another chamber, one he had not explored. Inside, the walls were lined with consoles and data storage units. Ancient logs flickered to life as he touched the panels, displaying text, symbols, and diagrams. These were the records of the original vault engineers, both humans and beings like the girl, detailing why the structures had been hidden. Elias read quickly. The coalition had forced early colonists to abandon Kepri 9. The planet had been rich with resources and life forms, and its native populations had been deemed a threat to expansion. The engineers had hidden life support systems, stasis chambers, and data archives, ensuring survival beyond human control. The girl was a descendant of those who had protected this secret. "We're not just preserving life," Elias said. "We're preserving history." The girl nodded, her eyes dark but resolute. Elias felt a wave of determination. Humanity's mistakes had once buried this world. Now it was up to them to correct those mistakes. By mid-afternoon, distant movement appeared on the horizon. Dust clouds rose where vehicles approached across the dunes. Elias raised his hand, signaling the girl to stay back. He stepped toward the entrance of the tunnel, observing through his binoculars. Terran Survey Command had arrived, their armored rovers scanning the landscape. "They came fast," Elias whispered. "Too fast." The girl stepped beside him, gesturing toward the tunnels. Her meaning was clear. They could use the underground network to defend themselves, but they would need ingenuity, not force. Elias smiled faintly. Humanity had always thrived in such moments, not through sheer strength but through resourcefulness. The first rover stopped near the plateau. Coalition soldiers disembarked, their scanners sweeping the dunes and the air. Elias moved quickly, using the tunnel's hidden passages to position himself strategically. The map had shown entrances, exits, and blind spots in the terrain. He realized the vaults themselves were designed not just for survival but for defense, if used wisely. Using a combination of old survey tech and improvised devices, Elias activated small drones from the tunnels, which flitted above the sand like swarming insects. They emitted signals that interfered with coalition sensors, creating false heat signatures and confusing radar. Soldiers looked around, confused. Dust kicked up by the drones, movement masked their position further. From inside the central chamber, Elias activated a secondary system, a low-frequency pulse that caused minor vibrations in the sand above. The coalition rovers registered anomalies, sudden shifts in terrain, but nothing concrete. The soldiers hesitated, unsure whether they were seeing a natural phenomenon or advanced enemy tactics. The girl guided Elias through the tunnels, showing him hidden alcoves and observation points. Together, they created a makeshift defense network using intelligence, speed, and the terrain itself. No weapons were used, no harm done, but every move was calculated to protect the vaults and their inhabitants. Hours passed. Coalition forces tried different approaches, scanners, drones, probes, but Elias' network anticipated each. Every time they adjusted, he adjusted faster. The underground technology, the map, and the girl's guidance combined with human ingenuity, creating a defensive system that could not be easily defeated. Finally, night fell. The twin moons rose, illuminating the desert. The coalition, unable to penetrate the defenses and puzzled by the strange readings, decided to pull back temporarily. The rovers retreated, leaving the plateau silent once more. Elias exhaled, relief mixing with exhilaration. "We did it," he whispered. "They couldn't reach us." The girl smiled faintly. She tapped the central panel, and the lights on the map pulsed softly. Elias realized that they had not only defended the vaults, they had shown the system that humans were capable of careful judgment and responsibility. For the first time, Elias felt something profound. Humanity's strength was not just in exploration or conquest. It was in choices, in creativity, in the ability to solve impossible problems without violence. They had defended the hidden world not with weapons but with thought, courage, and cooperation. The awakened beings began to explore further, moving through tunnels with Elias and the girl. Their gestures suggested gratitude, understanding, and a willingness to cooperate. Elias watched them, feeling a sense of unity he had never experienced. Humans, natives, and those who had been hidden underground were now part of a shared purpose. Elias returned to the central control panel. The map glowed brighter, as if acknowledging his success. The girl gestured toward a set of unexplored tunnels deeper into the planet. He nodded. The work was far from over. The underground network contained more chambers, more beings, more knowledge, and each discovery brought both hope and risk. As they prepared to explore further, Elias thought of the coalition. They were powerful, organized, and relentless. But he also knew that intelligence, quick thinking, and human adaptability could overcome far greater forces. Kepri 9 was not simply a desert. It was a test of humanity's best qualities: courage, ingenuity, and empathy. The girl guided him to a small chamber filled with panels and old storage units. Elias activated one, revealing a holographic archive of messages, star charts, and logs. He scanned quickly. The records described the early attempts to colonize Kepri 9, the conflicts with the native inhabitants, and the deliberate concealment of the underground vaults. Elias understood the full scope of the conspiracy. The coalition had tried to control and erase what they could not understand. Yet the beings, the girl, and the map had survived centuries, waiting for someone capable of acting wisely. Night deepened. The desert above remained quiet, but below the surface, life and knowledge were awakening. Elias felt the weight of responsibility settle on him again. He could not fail, not just for himself, not just for the girl, but for every being relying on their courage and judgment. The girl spoke softly, her voice carrying a single word repeated over and over. Elias felt its meaning: trust. He understood. She trusted him to make the right choices, and he would not betray that trust. Together, they continued to explore, stabilize, and protect. The night passed quickly, filled with discovery, careful adjustments, and quiet triumphs. Elias realized that true rebellion did not require violence. True rebellion was intelligence in action, courage in the face of authority, and protection of life against suppression. By dawn, the desert was bathed in golden light once more. Elias and the girl stood at the central chamber, observing the map. The underground network had been defended, stabilized, and partially explored. Coalition forces would return, no doubt, but they now faced a planet whose secrets were guarded by intelligence, preparation, and determination. Elias looked at the girl. She smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of shared victory. Together they had preserved history, protected life, and proven that humanity's strength was not only in power but in wisdom and courage. Above, the twin suns rose. Below, the vaults hummed with life. And in the heart of Kepri 9, a quiet rebellion had begun, one that relied not on weapons, but on the best qualities of humanity itself. The twin suns of Kepri 9 rose slowly, painting the desert with soft gold and pink hues. Elias Vorn stood at the entrance of the central chamber, looking out across the plateau. The storm of events from the past days had left him exhausted, but there was a calm determination in his chest. The underground vaults hummed quietly behind him, the awakened beings moving gracefully through the tunnels, stabilizing systems and exploring chambers that had been sealed for centuries. The girl stood beside him, her dark eyes scanning the horizon. She had guided him through this journey from the very beginning, her presence quiet but unshakable. She had trusted him, and he had learned to trust her in return. Together they had uncovered secrets buried by time, faced the coalition, and preserved life that the galaxy had forgotten. Elias took a deep breath. "We've done what we came here to do," he said softly, "but the world above it will want answers. And not all of them will be kind." The girl nodded, placing her hand lightly on his arm. She pointed toward the map he had brought from the cabin. Its lines glowed, showing tunnels, chambers, and energy sources still undiscovered. But now, the most important paths were secure. The vaults were stabilized, life support active, and the beings who had waited for centuries were finally free to move, learn, and decide their own destinies. Elias turned back to the plateau. Dust swirled in the morning light. In the distance, a small group of coalition rovers approached cautiously. This time, Elias expected them. He had prepared. When the patrol reached the edge of the plateau, Elias stepped forward to meet them. The girl stayed behind, watching silently from the shadows. He raised his hands, showing no threat, only confidence and clarity. "I am Elias Vorn," he said steadily. "I have been operating here independently, studying this planet. But there is more than you have been told. Kepri 9 is not uninhabited. It never was. And you are too late to claim control." The lead officer's eyes widened. His scanners picked up the energy of the vaults below. The readings were impossible by Terran standards. Life support systems functioning perfectly for centuries, advanced technology beyond their understanding, and beings previously unknown to human science. This is classified," the officer stammered. "You are in violation of coalition law." Elias shook his head. "Law does not always mean right. These beings were preserved to protect life, knowledge, and history. I will not allow them to be taken, controlled, or harmed. Humanity is capable of better choices than that. If you wish to understand, you will listen first." The girl stepped out from the shadows, her presence commanding yet serene. She gestured toward the patrol, then toward the tunnels. The coalition soldiers looked at her, hesitant, sensing the weight of her authority. Though human in appearance, there was something in her gaze, something ancient and wise that made them pause. Elias took this moment to act. Using the encrypted broadcast he had sent the day before, he activated a public feed. Across civilian channels, the story of Kepri 9 and its hidden vaults appeared. Star maps, projections of the underground network, and proof of life were broadcast openly. People across colonies, research stations, and civilian outposts began to see what had been hidden. The coalition officer's face turned pale. You've made this public," he exclaimed. Elias nodded. "Some truths cannot be erased, and some life cannot be controlled. Humanity is strong, not because it conquers, but because it protects, because it chooses wisely when faced with a secret greater than itself." The officer hesitated, then spoke into his communicator. Moments later, reports came back: public outrage, questions from civilian authorities, and demands for transparency. The coalition had to retreat, not because they were weak, but because the world now knew what had been hidden. Elias turned to the girl. She smiled faintly, a mix of relief and pride. "We've done it," he said. "The vaults are safe. They cannot be erased again." She nodded. Then she pointed toward the tunnels still unexplored. There was more to be done. More chambers, more knowledge, more life to awaken. But Elias felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Together, they had preserved history and life, and ensured that the next step would be taken by those who chose care over control. The beings in the vaults began to emerge fully now, interacting with Elias and the girl. They communicated in gestures, symbols, and subtle sounds, sharing knowledge about the planet, its history, and the decisions that had led to their concealment. Elias listened carefully, recording everything. This knowledge could help humanity learn from past mistakes, understand new forms of life, and navigate the galaxy with wisdom rather than dominance. As the sun climbed higher, Elias realized the truth of the HFY spirit he had been living. Humanity's strength was not in weapons, politics, or expansion, but in the ability to care, to adapt, and to act responsibly when faced with something greater than itself. The girl had trusted him, and he had honored that trust. The beings had trusted him, and he had honored them too. The coalition did not return immediately. Civilian channels flooded with questions, demands for transparency, and calls for ethical treatment of the awakened beings. Elias and the girl had won not through force, but through wisdom, action, and careful planning. Humanity, for all its flaws, had shown its potential for greatness. Elias led the girl and the beings through the central chamber once more, showing them the tunnels, the energy systems, and the map projections. Every path, every hidden room was now secured, stable, and ready for exploration. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was the work of careful thought, not power. This was the triumph of intelligence and compassion. The girl placed her hand on his arm and pointed toward the horizon. Elias understood. It was time for the beings to begin their own journey, to explore, to learn, and to integrate carefully with the world above. The vaults had been preserved, but now life would move forward. Elias felt a pang of emotion. For years he had lived in solitude, believing that distance was safety. But now he knew the truth. Isolation had given him perspective, but collaboration had given him purpose. Humanity was at its best when it chose responsibility over convenience, courage over fear. As they emerged from the tunnels, the desert stretched endlessly before them. Dust rose in soft clouds as the awakened beings moved with grace, exploring the surface carefully. Elias watched, understanding that he was witnessing the rebirth of a world where humans, natives, and long-preserved life could coexist. The girl turned to him one last time. Her eyes held gratitude, pride, and a quiet command. Elias nodded. He would continue to guard, guide, and record, but the next steps would be theirs. The world above was vast, and Kepri 9 was no longer a secret. Elias looked at the cabin on the plateau. It had been the starting point of this journey, a place of solitude that had led to discovery, responsibility, and triumph. The map pulsed faintly, as if acknowledging its role in what had been achieved. He smiled. Humanity's story was far from over, but today it had proven that intelligence, courage, and care could prevail. As the sun climbed high, Elias felt the weight of time and history settling into place. The coalition, the galaxy, and the future of Kepri 9 would all remember this day, not as a tale of conflict or conquest, but as a quiet triumph of humanity's best qualities. The girl and the awakened beings moved across the desert, exploring their new world. Elias followed for a while, then returned to the cabin. He paused, looking back at the plateau. Kepri 9 was no longer a hidden, forgotten world. It had been reclaimed, not by force but by the best of what humans could be, thoughtful, brave, and protective. Elias Vorn took a deep breath, feeling the wind of the desert brush against his face. Somewhere in the tunnels and across the dunes, life stirred with new purpose, and for the first time in years, he felt that solitude was no longer necessary. Humanity's strength was alive here, in choices, courage, and care. He turned back to the cabin, ready to continue his work, ready to chronicle what had been discovered, and ready to ensure that Kepri 9 would remain a world reclaimed for life, knowledge, and wisdom. The twin suns of Kepri 9 rose fully, illuminating a planet no longer hidden, a story no longer buried, and humanity at its finest, capable of greatness not because of power, but because of heart, intelligence, and courage. And so, a quiet rebellion of care, foresight, and respect had succeeded, leaving a world reborn, a story preserved, and a future waiting for those willing to choose wisely.